Um, and Neil, I apologize. You asked my name. Matt is good. Matt Mahler has a kind of ring. It's better than Gustav Mahler. No disrespect. No disrespect.
Mhm.
It's a real. I'm Matt with MovieWeb. It's a real pleasure to speak with both of you. Scott, you've done a great job at like people first, empathetic documentaries about health and community. And Neil, of course, you have this poetics of passion that communicates macroscopic, technical ideas in a way that most people can never surmise. So it's a real joy to speak with both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your interest. Yeah.
Yeah, I and you both work together on the great food evolution, and I want to get to your collaboration in a bit, and I'm sure we will. It's fascinating, but I'll start with Scott. It's the film sort of evolves as it takes place, as events evolve, and that often happens with documentaries. What was the original impetus of the film? Was it an investigation just into the measles outbreak and the history of vaccines? And was Neil involved from the start, or did he come in after COVID hit?
Sure. So in 2019, we were seeing a record-breaking measles outbreaks across the country and around the world. There was a state of emergency in the Orthodox Jewish community in New York City, state of emergency in Washington State, outbreaks around Europe. I thought, what's going on here?
By the way, the outbreaks were geographically localized. So that's an important fact here. Yeah.
It wasn't random. It was places where disinformation had caused people to stop getting vaccinated. And I looked into it a little bit. I did a little bit of research. It wasn't hard to find that measles was almost eliminated in 2000. I'm like, well, we're almost like, why is this happening? And I saw an interview with Dr. Paul Offit, and he put it very simply that there are people out there fomenting fear and disinformation and causing parents to not get their children vaccinated. And I reached out to Dr. Offit, and he was very generous with his time, and he introduced me to other people in public health, like Dr. Fauci. But I also wanted to tell the other side of the story with the people that are fomenting this disinformation. So we followed people that were at events for sorry, I can do this again. We followed some of the top people on the anti-vaccine side, the OG, Dr. Andrew Wakefield, Del Bigtree, and of course now the top of the pyramid, Robert Kennedy Jr. And we thought we had a pretty interesting film in that. It was fascinating. It was heartbreaking. It was complicated. And then COVID happened. And obviously it went to this other level, and it became more of a personal film as well. All of us, that my family, I hope, represented humbly, that all of us that we went through this together. And yeah, that's how it came together. And then in terms of Neil's participation, we met on my previous film, Food Evolution. And while he didn't get technically involved with Shot in the Arm until later in the editing project, I've been grateful that he's communicated with me a lot. So I'm always leaning on him for what's the best information and how to be a better communicator. So he's always in my thoughts, and I was very honored when he decided to come on board and help me as both a script consultant and executive producer.
Yeah, and Neil, you, as Scott said, you're credited as script consultant as well as executive producer. I'm curious what that entailed, what your sort of relationship was like through the process.
It started out
why you were interested in the first place too.
Yeah, because I had already had the prior relationship with Scott on Food Evolution. Just as a friend, he asked me to look over his latest project. I think at the time it was like a 2-hour edit. It was finally trimmed down to 90 minutes. He knows that I have experience in the world of communication. While I count myself among the ranks of educators, a pure educator might be just someone who teaches regularly, but that's not enough to comb over to pour over a script and say, this is missing a point that could be more potent if it's said that way, for example, in the narration or in its choice of video clips. So I was offering him continuous advice and commentary along the way, and no good deed goes unpunished. He promoted me to executive producer, and I don't know if I'll ever agree to that again, because now I'm
only on my films. Only on my.
I'm on the phone with this guy on the horn 5 times a day, and it's a huge, important task to help a film get noticed, make sure it hits all the right channels, it gets recognized by the right people, the right media outlets. And so I am there as one of his many engines to help build the public visibility of this project. And I'm using not my knowledge as an astrophysicist, but my knowledge as a scientist, how science works, the methods and tools that get invoked, and how can he best tell that story, because he's the storyteller in this.
Yeah, no, I think it's a wise choice. Great job, Scott, with that. And it goes back, I remember an episode of Real Time that you were on, Neil, and Bill Maher has really transformed into that old man yells at cloud meme in the past couple of years. But I could sense just the way you communicated effectively against any sort of disinformation, and we're such a proponent of the scientific method. It totally makes sense that you would be involved here. And just tangentially, what are the difficulties you've encountered when trying to communicate fact, science, especially regarding this? It seems like a epistemological nightmare.
Yeah, it is. It is. We learn from. I can learn just in the field, but we also know from psychological research that if you just go to hit someone on the head, they dig their heels in more strongly. If you hit them on the head with the truth, and they are deeply embedded, it hardly ever converts them. And I even hate to use the word convert, it hardly ever convinces them. And you have to be more tactical about it. Dare I say, even more subtle. You have to work your conversation in such a way that they arrive at the conclusion on their own, rather than having to just force a pivot to believe what this person says. Now they want to believe what you say. So you got to get deep into their brain wiring, deep into their pathways of thought and reason. And once you have access to that, you have some chance of having them see where they had previously been wrong in this. But my real answer to you is, this should have been taught in elementary school, in high school, in college, where science is a means of querying nature with methods and tools exquisitely tuned to establish what is objectively true in the world. And by the same token, it can establish what is objectively false. Yes. And that is the power of science like no other enterprise humans have ever engaged.
Yeah, I remember high school 20 years ago, there was a class, critical thinking, and well, 3 or 4 days of the week, we just did crossword puzzles.
Oops.
The teacher just sat there. It was kind of,
good title, bad teacher.
Yeah, exactly. And I imagine that's the way it is, because I feel like the actual process of critical thinking is lacking entirely.
Yeah, what I would say is that's a start, a class on critical thinking, notwithstanding your crossword puzzle training in the class. That's a start. But ideally, this critical thinking would be infused into every subject that you're taught in school.
That's right.
So that's not thought of as a separate way of looking at the world. It is fundamental to every way of looking at the world. Even in the liberal arts, if you read a historical account of some event, you can say, well, who wrote this? Oh, it was the people who won the war who wrote this account of that battle. Is there any other account? Okay, let me see all the information here. What are the sources? Where are they coming from? And so that's critical thinking. And you have to, and this notion of, well, I'm a skeptic. Well, there are people who are skeptical of everything, even when the evidence shows that's no longer necessary. So people have taken this, I want to be a skeptic, to an extreme where it actually subtracts from their access to the truth rather than add to it.
And they're actually cynical. They're not really skeptical anymore. They're cynical, and it's
And I think someone even says that in the film too, might be often. But Scott, to sort of piggyback off that, there's a wonderful line saying like the people on the FDA board looking at vaccines, they're the real vaccine skeptics. They're the ones who have to be skeptical because that's how the scientific method progresses. I do love the way you explore the whole process in a people-based way. It's interesting you purposefully stay away from sort of lengthy expositional scenes explaining scientific details, graphs or animation of how things work. What was the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, we tried to get, obviously we had to have some sections explaining the history of vaccines and others that to make a few very clear scientific points. But thank you for noticing that wasn't our job in this story. This story was a human story. This story is really at its core is not even a COVID story. It's a COVID story as the metaphor to go to a deeper conversation about our human condition. And
well, I'll take credit for one of the graphs in it.
Yes, of course, there are graphs.
Well, so in the storytelling,
yeah.
It's describing that the MMR vaccine does not contribute to autism. And I said, Scott, we don't need to just have a person with authority declare this. There's data. Let's find the data. And I think one of the most potent graphs, it goes quickly, but it's there where it shows there's some countries that started reducing the MMR vaccine, yet the autism rates were unaffected by the fact they even went up. All right. And so you see these two graphs crossing. So that way it's information that's not simply delivered by the authority of a talking head.
But yeah, to get to the human side of the story, that the COVID, you could say that some people look at this film and go, of course it's a COVID movie, and it is a COVID movie, and it's a measles movie, and it's a vaccine movie, and it's an anti-vax movie. But the subtext of it is it's a human story about how fragile our human condition is and how easy it is for any of us to take the route of selfishness, take the route of misinformation, take the route of believing our tribes and believing in things that are verifiably not true if we want to believe them, and how much that disinformation and, God forbid, selfishness and lack of humility has led to really an attack on some of the foundations of our democracy, including the social contract. And that's really the piece of it that we've seen most effective in audiences and seeing that that's what they're walking away with and really engaged with.
I think I have one last question. Finally, I could talk about this all day. Fun, horrifying question. Who would be a worse president, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or Donald Trump?
Oh God, that's an awful question. Holy cow. I would still say Donald Trump, as much as I dislike and distrust Robert Kennedy Jr. Donald Trump has used his superpowers for evil in a better, more effective way. But it's a terrible, awful thing to face. I choose neither, but yeah, I would still have to choose Donald Trump. Is more dangerous because he's also gotten the following. He has almost half of our country believing that he is a force of good and should be followed. And it's like the biggest. What's our love of con artist films, Neil? It's like he's the greatest con artist that our presidencies have ever seen.
Yeah, I don't talk much about leaders in a democracy, only because there's an electorate that places them into power. We think of them as leaders, but at the end of the day, at some level, there are followers, right? We elect them.
That's right.
Okay, so it's we the people. So if there's a faction of the demographic that supports any one politician or another, and that politician has either anti-scientific views or views that are not in the interest of an informed democracy, then as an educator, I don't think about those politicians. I think about the people voting for them. And so my task is to at least ensure that the voters make decisions that are scientifically informed in an era where the survival of civilization pivots on informed decisions that you make as a voter and that the person you put into office makes as a politician. So I don't have views of politicians the way I have views of the public. And by the way, so I will turn to the public and try to educate them. So at the end of the day, it would not be possible for someone to rise to power who had an anti-scientific platform, because your electorate doesn't have an anti-scientific platform. So that's my dream state of the future of civilization.
Leaders are a symptom and not the disease.
Thank you. Thanks for simplifying what it took me 5 minutes. Okay.
It's such a joy to speak with both of you. I could go on forever. I know they hate me for taking so much time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you
Great
much.
film.